All right, it's good to see you guys again today. We're gonna go back to the Sermon on the Mount today, and look at chapter 5 of Matthew, verses 38 through 48. All right, Matthew 5, 38 through 48, and we'll spend some time talking about it, see if we can make it relate to us a little bit. But mostly just kind of point out a little bit of the culture and all of that that's going on. So, Matthew 5, 38. You need to see them? All right. So let's go ahead and we'll start reading there. And I'm going to read through 48. So I know that's a lot of verses all at once, but we'll get through this. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn him the other also. And if someone wants to sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. If someone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those that persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. He causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good, and he sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your brothers, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. All right. So the Sermon on the Mount, we've mentioned this a few times in this, going over it. This is Jesus' longest string of teaching. Right? It goes from Matthew 5 through Matthew 7. So you got 3 chapters there, 5, 6, and 7, that Jesus kind of talks about practical living, for one, and how to live out a godly life. And he begins with the word blessed. Blessed are poor in spirit. Blessed are those that hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are the merciful, and then he says, blessed are those that are persecuted. All right, so he's beginning his speech with this theme of being blessed, which is probably different than what they've heard, because they've all heard from the Pharisees. Those were the teachers, the Pharisees, the Sadducees. They've heard all the rules and all the laws, which are important, but the Pharisees are known for kind of adding to the laws, their own laws. And then it all gets kind of mixed and mangled up. So they had traditions that they had suddenly become these laws to them, right? And so Jesus kind of went out from the beginning and said, hey, listen, you're blessed if these things describe you. And so Jesus takes this whole different approach, which had to be refreshing and probably challenging to those who are listening for the very first time. And we get to this part here. And he says, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Now it was said, because that was actually written in the law. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And it had less to do with vengeance and more to do with placing limits on our retaliation. So it was meant to kind of level so that our retaliation, our punishment, doesn't go beyond the crime. All right, that's kind of what that law was intended to be. So it wasn't like, all right, you stole my candy bar, so now I'm going to slice your throat. All right, it wasn't. But if we didn't have some kind of limit on the retaliation, then in one's own mind, they could say, man, I was hungry and he took from me. And so, yeah, I did that. And so the idea of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth was meant to place limits on one's retaliation. And that's really kind of what the purpose was. But Jesus says, and takes it a new step, he says, don't retaliate at all. Don't show vengeance at all. In fact, turn the other cheek. Go the extra mile. And if you're hearing this from their perspective, this is almost humorous. We're reading it and we're like, well, man, somebody hurt me, I'm going to hurt them back. But ultimately, what Jesus is doing is saying you can give them the ultimate insult. Somebody slaps you on the cheek, turn to him the other. Just like if we say, that all you got? Really? That's it? And notice he says, if somebody, let me find it here so I'll read it to you correctly. Do not resist it. If someone wants to take your tunic. I'm going to find it. Hold on. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Do not resist an evil person. One strikes you on your right cheek. Turn to him the other also. Most people from the beginning of time have been predominantly use what hand? Right or left? Right. All right. There's some left-handed people, but most people are right-handed. In order for a right-handed person to hit you on the right cheek, it'd have to be kind of this backhand slap, right? So it's not even a punch like I want to knock you out. It's not like I'm gonna completely knock you out with a right hook kind of a thing. This is like a backhanded kind of a insulting slap. And Jesus says, turn the other cheek. Can you imagine that though? Isn't that like the ultimate kind of, our tendency is whenever somebody insults us, we insult them back, right? I used to watch, whenever I was younger, I used to watch all these videos, like these burn videos, where somebody would say your mama joke or whatever, and then the other person would say something harsher, right? And I used to laugh at that. But this is Jesus saying, no, that's not how you live your life. Somebody insults you by slapping you on the cheek, say you missed this side. And it creates this whole new way of looking at life. Right? Because when they make a Roman soldiers, because in those days, when he says, if somebody asks you to go 1 mile, go with them 2. Now they were under Roman oppression, right? So a Roman soldier could walk up to you at any time and says, you, carry my bag, carry my stuff. And you were forced legally to carry it 1 mile. And what they would typically do is the people would mark out 1 mile, right? They would go and they'd walk their mile. I don't know how they knew where a mile was, but they had it calculated. This many steps equals a mile. They would go and they'd do it and they'd put a marker there. That was my mile. I'm done. And they throw it down on the ground. Say, find somebody else. And what Jesus is saying here is you're going and you're carrying it and they say, you're going to carry my bag. And then you carry it the whole way. And then you get to the end of it and you go, hey, look, that wasn't much of a punishment. Let me go another mile with you. You see how that would get under the skin of somebody? By doing good. Sometimes when people don't meet you with the anger that you have, it makes you even more angry, right? I've had people come in. I'd be sitting in a chair, and they're yelling and everything, and then they just kind of stand up over me like that, and I just talk soft to them. It made them so mad. They're like, whatever they're talking about. Because usually I don't know. I'm just hoping they don't spit on me. Because, and then I just go, huh. So that's what you think, huh? Nice. Have a good day. Good to see you. Anything I can do for you? And they don't know how to respond, right? Because when we're angry, we think that the proper response is for the next person to get angry. So if you come and you raise your voice at me, then my tendency, my human tendency is to raise my voice also. And if you talk louder, then I'll talk louder. And if you start yelling, then I'll yell back. Jesus says, nah, go the extra mile. Turn the other cheek. They want to take your tunic, your coat, give them a shirt too. And that's a different way of thinking. And it doesn't make any sense whatsoever, but it works. Right? It works. When somebody wants you to get upset and you practice self-control, a person doesn't know how to respond. Because that's not the response they were looking for. There's like this humor to it that Jesus is doing. Like, you can't get under my skin. You've already tried. You've already insulted me by slapping me on the cheek. And I just go, hey, you missed a spot. You've already tried to intimidate me by making me carry your bag for a mile while you're wearing your full-on army fatigue gear going on here, right? They've got the armor. They've got the helmet. They've got the spear and the shield. And they're making me carry some of their stuff. And they're walking me this mile, probably ridiculing me the whole way. And then we get there and I go, hey, let's go another mile, buddy. It changes something. And you're like, I'm taking your coat from you. It's mine. I'll take you to court over it. And you say, yeah, have it. You know what? Have my shirt too. Take it. Something changes in there, right? This idea of retaliation suddenly becomes this, I just won that battle. See, Jesus isn't saying be weak. No. In fact, all of those things take strength. It takes strength for me to restrain myself when you're making me angry. It takes strength to go that second mile. It takes strength to look you in the eye and to say, you know, that slap didn't do anything to me. Jesus is showing us how to live a strong life. He really is. And we think I like the underdog stories, right? I like the movies where it's like, you know, this kid's being bullied and all of this, and then all of a sudden by the end of the movie, he beats his bullies up. Right? We like that kind of thing. And we think it's kind of weak whenever a person's like, oh man, let him hit me again. But in actuality, Jesus is saying who the stronger person is. Because it's not that you're not standing up for yourself. It's not that you're not strong. It's that you know your strength, but you choose to restrain yourself. That's what real strength is. And so, and then he says, you have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Now, hate your enemy was never part of the deal. But that's how whenever we're like, hey, you need to love that person. Some of us here then hate the other person. And Jesus says, not just love your enemy, not just love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but love your enemies. And not only love your enemies, pray for the ones that persecute you. Pray for the ones that are intentionally trying to harm you. Be loving your own people That's easy. It's easy to love my own people. Oh, well, I guess it's not always easy. But it's easy for me to love my kids. I might not like them all the time, but I always love them. And respecting somebody that respects you, it's not that much of a challenge. But loving your enemies, man, that's hard. Isn't it? Responding not with revenge, but with redeeming love. Even to people that irritate you. You know, sometimes it's not, for me, it's not the guy that wants to spit in my face. I've had that happen quite a few times. I don't know. I thought I was likable, but I get spit on a lot. It's not the guy that wants to spit in my face or that pulls the knife out on me. Had that happen a few times too. But it's the one that is just a little bit irritating that really gets under my skin. Right? The other person, I'm like, man, something's wrong with that guy. But it's the one that's just the little irritant that continues to be it could be an irritating personality trait that they have. It might be something that they do that irritates me, right? Like I was teaching a class a while back, and the person they're like, can you repeat that? And I repeat it, and they're trying to write it down. And they go, can you repeat that? And I repeat it. They try to write it down. Can you repeat that? And by then I forgot what I was going to say next. And they go, can you repeat that? I'm like, how many times? I don't even know what I said anymore. Like, and then, everybody in the class is like, he said. Those kind of things bug me more. When we love the person that is incapable of loving us back, then we begin to live out Jesus' teaching. It's a little easier to love those that can love us back, right? It's easier to loan money to the person that we know that will pay us back, right? It's a little easier to do a favor for somebody that we know can return that favor later. But it's those that are incapable of paying us back. Those that are incapable of loving us back. That Jesus says, when you start to grasp this, when you start to love that person, then you're starting to understand what I've been trying to teach you all along. And I just love the practicality that Jesus gives us. Right? The humor that he uses. Because he's coming at us from a place of understanding. Really think about it. John, in his gospel, starts off by saying, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And he was with God in the beginning, and through him all things were made, and without him nothing was made that has been made. That's John 1:1, and a couple verses following. And then in verse 14 he says, and the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. So he's talking about Jesus, who he describes as the Word, who was from the beginning and was responsible for creation. So if Jesus was around at the creation process, don't you think that he understands loving people that aren't necessarily capable of loving him back in the way that he loves them? He understands those things. He creates us and he says, man, I love you, and here's some guidelines there that's going to help you to always be in my presence. And then what's the first thing we do? It's got to be a different way. And then we do our own thing. When we start to grasp some of these teachings that Jesus does here in the Sermon on the Mount, we start to understand how to live the way that he designed for us to live. But I let my pride, I let my individuality, I let my arrogance, I let whatever my own self get in the way of how he wants me to live too often. There's a couple of verses here in this next section that I'll just go over real quick. And in 1 through 18, he's talking about giving to those that are in need, and he's talking about prayer, and he's talking about fasting. All right? And there's something that we don't have time to read them all. All right? I'll spare you that. But I would encourage you to read them. That's chapter 6, 1 through 18. But one thing in all of them, he says, be careful not to do your acts of righteousness before men to be seen, because then you will have received your reward already. Whenever it comes to prayer, he says, and do not pray like the Pharisees who love to stand on the street corners and pray and be loud in their prayer. And then he says, in your fasting, don't make it look like you're fasting. It's got all of this, don't do it to be seen by people. Do it for the right reasons. I don't know if you were like this as a kid or if you had a kid that was like this, but my boys, I got 4 boys, and most of them are older now and have grown out of this phase, but I still got one that's really into it, right? He loves to jump, and he'll get up on the couch. I'm like, oh, would you quit jumping on the couch? But whatever. And he goes, look at me, Dad. And then he jumps. Did you see that? Did you see that? Did you see me? Look at me do this trick. Did you see it? Right? He wants to be seen. He wants to know that his dad sees him. And that's kind of what he's talking about here. That's cool when you want to be seen by your dad. But Jesus is saying, don't make your righteousness all about being seen by people. Don't do what you do just to be seen. All right? Don't say, man, let me say this really long, drawn out prayer, and let me throw in all these religious sounding words, because then I'll sound like I'm more spiritual. Or let me talk about this or that it makes me appear that I know God better. Instead, he says, live your life in a way that we don't seek to impress others. We have this tendency to project an image that we want people to see, right? I want you to see me in a certain way. You want to be seen in a certain way. You fill out a job application, you don't put down anything negative, right? You put down all your positive traits. And I hate whenever you get to the interview and they're like, tell me a weakness. Because I always go like, this question is my weakness, all right? Because sometimes I answer it too honestly. But we project what we want people to see. We want others to see our accomplishments. And it's not even that I want God to see them. I want you to see them. Right? We want other people to see how good we're doing. Right? There's I told you that most of you that were here, that I worked here for quite a few years, right? And whenever we first moved into this building, I had my office right there where Charlotte's is. And there would be a guy that would come and he'd clean, but he'd always tap on the window and he'd show me the spray bottle and the rag, and then he'd clean it. And he goes, hey, I'm cleaning. And I mean, you can walk outside and see if something's clean, right? But he'd always want to be seen. And I believed that it was just because maybe he hadn't felt all that important at times. I don't know. But when it comes to our life with God, when we seek to impress others, it leaves God unimpressed. All right? When I'm living my life to impress you, God's not impressed by that. He wants me to do in secret my service to him rather than putting it out on a megaphone. Right? Imagine if we do that, right? I'll call up here to the front desk, whoever answers the phone, and I go, hey, can you get on the speaker and announce Daniel prayed this morning? Hey, can you get on there and say, I read my devotional today? Hey, can you get on there to say, I helped this old lady pump her gas? What would I be doing that for? It's not to please God, right? It'd be to be seen by others. But see, the fact of the matter is that people are going to see you. They're going to see your acts. And you don't have to point them out. You don't have to point out what you've been doing right. People will see it. In fact, we read where Jesus is talking about you are the light of the world, a city on a hill can not be hidden. We talked about that a little while ago. And he says, do your acts so that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven. So when I'm doing something, I don't do it to be seen by you, and you shouldn't do it to be seen by me or by others, but rather to bring glory to God. When we seek to impress others, it leaves God unimpressed. I like that. I need to put that on my mirror or something to remind us, to remind myself, not to remind us. You might not need that. And then it goes on from there. All right. See, what I'm doing. I'm trying to get us through it. So we can do something else. 19 through 34. We won't read all of these either. All right. But he's going to talk in here about money. All right. Nobody likes to talk about that. Right. But he says, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, but store up treasures in heaven. Where your treasure is, your heart will be there also. All right. And then the next section there, beginning in verse, he says you can't serve two masters. You'll love one and hate the other. And then he goes in, beginning in verse 25, talking about don't worry about what you're going to eat or drink or what you're going to wear, but seek first God's kingdom. We get uncomfortable sometimes talking about money. I mean, I do. Somebody says, how much you make? I'm like, none of your business, bro. All right? And sometimes you're like, not enough, right? Depending on who I'm talking to. Really? Sometimes you're embarrassed to say what you make because you don't make nearly as much as that guy. And then sometimes you're embarrassed to say because you're struggling, but you make a lot more than this guy. And he kind of gets into it. He says, the eye. I got to read this part. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are bad, your whole body will be filled with darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? All right. It's interesting that he's says, don't store for yourselves treasures on earth. And he says, the eye is the lamp of the body. Because the eye, it's all about your eye. Does your eye look to covet? You know what covet means? Like you want something that's not yours. Right? You want something that's not yours. Right? Whenever somebody's got a really cool jacket on. Right? I'm a big hoodie and jacket guy. All right? That's why I love the fall and winter. Sometimes I'll be walking around in the summertime, be like 95 degrees, and I still got a hoodie on because it just looks cool, man. Other people think I look pretty stupid, but I'm like, man, I'm wearing this hoodie, you know? Like, I worked hard for this hoodie. I don't know. But I like it. But you got like this cool jacket on, and it's got all the designs and everything that I like. I'm like, man, I want that coat. I want to have that. How do I get one of those? And see, it's this idea that we covet. I don't know, usually we talk about covet and they say don't covet another man's wife, right? I might not have an issue with that, but I might covet another man's car. Right? I might like something else. He's saying be content with what you have. Is your eye looking to God? If it is, then it doesn't have time to look at other stuff. But we've got an entire industry. The entire society is dedicated to make us covet. Right? Social media. You get on there on Facebook and somebody's like posting some picture and they're at the beach. Like, man, I want to be there. Or they're up in the mountains. Like, man, I want to be there. And then there's commercials, right? And every commercial is designed to make you want whatever product they're trying to sell. And sometimes I don't even know what product they're trying to sell, but I want it, right? Like you get a phone and then they advertise the next phone. You're like, my phone can't do that, right? My phone doesn't take that good of a picture. I want one that takes better pictures. And then you get the one that takes better pictures, but it's slower. Now I need a faster one that takes good pictures. Like on and on and on. We've got this entire industry dedicated to making us covet. And it says you cannot serve two masters. And you might say, but I don't serve God. I don't serve money. I serve God. But here's the test. He says, wherever your treasure is, you'll find your heart. Wherever your treasure is, you'll find your heart. A lot of people say where your heart is, that's where you'll find your treasure. But Jesus says where you put your treasure, that's where you're going to find your heart. That's kind of the test for us. There was a man that went looking for his heart, and he looked all over, right? He looked all over the place. And you know where he found it? Where he left his treasure. Oh, no, that was a really bad story. Sorry. Don't worry about your stuff. Don't worry about it. All right, that's what he's saying. Don't worry about it. I have what I truly need because God provides. And what I truly need is him. I mean, that's really it. I've looked all over the place for all kinds of things, trying to find some sort of happiness. But what I really need isn't any of that. It was found in God. And he says, look at the flowers. God will take care of you too. He can take care of some flowers. If he takes care of the birds, he's surely going to take care of you. But I'm like, I'm not so sure. That's what I do. I ain't so sure about that. I better take care of me. And then he gets all back into the cycle where he says, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you as well. Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Each day has enough trouble of its own, right? You've had some problems today. It's enough trouble each day just to wake up sometimes. And them days, you're like, man, I don't even want to get up. You wake up in the morning and I'm on this side of the dirt again. Sometimes we have those thoughts. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Just don't worry about what tomorrow's going to bring. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. And all these things will be given to you as well. Putting him first. I mean, that's really what it's all about. It takes 66 books to try to get that point across to us. To put him first. Right? It's interesting that he gives Moses the 10 commandments, and the very first one is, have no other God before me. Just like, put me first. And then here it is, generations later, and he comes in the flesh, and he says, oh yeah, by the way, put God first. And we're still We're still struggling with it. Every day. Because we're seeking to please others. We're seeking selfish gain. We don't always know that we're doing it. That's the thing. I don't think people necessarily set out. I don't wake up in the morning and go, man, I'm going to be selfish and seek to please others and let everybody look at me today. But we live our life like it. And that's the hard part. Sometimes we can't recognize it in ourselves. And so I'm thankful for scriptures like this that kind of point it out. Or if I really am honest with it and I look at it and I go, am I trying to please people? Am I trying to have people look at me and think that I'm something? All right, what's the phrase? Walking around like you do don't stink. All right. Toned it down, didn't I? Right? Am I really putting God first? Because if I do, I'm not going to have a problem-free life. But I'm going to look at my problems and say, there's a whole lot more to this life than that problem. And it changes my perspective. So, I appreciate you guys. I really do. You come in and you listen and put up with me, all right? And I've got bad stories and I've got bad jokes, but you still listen. And I appreciate that about you. I'm going to go ahead and... Oh, man. Yeah, that's right. That's the beard. You like my hairstyle? Yeah, I woke up feeling kind of hairy today. I'm going to go ahead and pray for us